Good morning, everyone. My name is Paul Maassen. I'm Chief of Country Support at the Open Government Partnership. Thank you for joining our webinar this morning. How can we get EU recovery right? And a very important topic that many of us have been thinking and talking about for a long time. And it's a great opportunity today with a brilliant lineup of speakers to dive a bit further into this and especially explore how the open government values of transparency, accountability, and participation can be brought into the recovery approach. We have great speakers lined up. I will introduce them in a moment, but first let me give you some housekeeping thoughts. Firstly, we will be curating questions for our panelists through Slido today. To submit your questions, go to slido.com, enter the code 297049, and then follow the instructions on the screen. You can also vote the questions you think should be asked first, and they will directly come back into the second half of our conversation today. We're recording the conversation as well, so it can be shared afterwards on YouTube. So just for you to be aware of that. Please you introduce yourself in the chat box. You can continue using it during the conversation to share your reflections, questions, resources, and thoughts. If you accidentally exit the webinar at any time, please log in again using the same login details you used before, because they are customized to each participant. With that, let me turn to our speakers. We have 4 speakers with us today. I see Marcella has joined us as well. First speaker on your screen is Céline Gauer. She is Director General at the European Commission. She's also the head of the Recovery and Resilience Task Force of the European Commission. Great to have you, Céline. We have Marcella Panucci, Head of Cabinet on the Ministry for Public Administration of the Government of Italy. As you know, Italy is one of the biggest recipients of the Recovery Fund. Marcella is also our key counterpart when it comes to open government in Italy. We have Ints Dālderis, I hope you pronounce it right, Ints, Special Advisor at the Ministry of Finance for the Government of Latvia, and many other things he has done in his life. We might come to that as well. And Helen Darbishire, Executive Director of Access Info Europe and also a member of the OGP Steering Committee, Civil Society member of the Steering Committee. For the first 30 minutes, we have questions prepared from our side. But as I said, for the second 30 minutes, we'll go to you, either the questions coming into the Slido or the chat, and we'll bring them to the panelists. Please remember to submit your questions, don't forget. Otherwise, I have to make up questions. Let me start with a quick fire round of questions for our panelists. You'll get exactly 60 seconds for that. There will be a timer on the screen. It's a very big timer on my screen. And the question is very straightforward. I invite the participants also to answer them in the chat. So the question is, in your view, what is at stake if we don't get recovery right? And Céline, I'll go to you first.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. Well, if we don't get it right, it's a huge missed opportunity for growth, for the economy, but also and most importantly for the people. Because we have seen that the crisis and the pandemic have increased inequalities, and it is an opportunity really to get the convergence back, to get cohesion restored, and this is also absolutely essential for democracy. It would also be a missed opportunity for the planet. So we have seen after the financial crisis what damage was caused by a recovery that has led to an increase in emission. Time is running, and this time we need to really get it right. And finally, missed opportunity for Europe. We have seen a huge trust and a huge expression of solidarity through the recovery fund. So we need to really deliver on that. Thank you.
Excellent timing. Wow, I'm impressed. Marcella, over to you.
Hi, nice to meet you virtually. I think we will bear a huge responsibility if we don't get recovery right, especially towards the younger generations. Young people have been hugely struck by the pandemic and by the crisis that we've been going through during the last 2 years. The Next Generation EU is looking at the next generations and is promoting investments and reforms in order to let them inherit a better world. Therefore, I think that we have to do all our best to implement national plans and get recovery right, especially in 2022, which has been marked as the European Year for Youth. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcella. Ints, same question for you. You're on mute, Ints.
I'm sorry. Good morning. Regarding this question, I think it's as well. I can agree with our colleagues that it's very important that we can't fail this opportunity for the future. I am very glad that finally, especially during this pandemic, European society decided to recover together, to introduce new instruments and to share responsibility for all the European society for the future. And I think it's very important, and that's mean that this is the right way how we should deal all the problems in future. And this is the first step, and we couldn't fail this time, because we should so for our people that this is the right way how we can deal with such big issues in this time and next problems as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ints. I like that catchphrase of recover together. I think that's a really nice way of summarizing it. Helen.
Thank you very much, Paul. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Bonjour, buenos dias from Madrid. We've already heard it's about the whole European project. The transparency, accountability and participation around the recovery funds is about strengthening our democratic mechanisms. It's about addressing climate change and trying to save the planet. Those are the big overarching issues. I would say it's not only about recovery. We need to have transparency, accountability and participation in absolutely everything we do. And as we're seeing now with the concerns about the illegal money coming into Europe from Ukraine, or related to the conflict with Russia, we really need to strengthen our mechanisms for protecting us from corruption.
Thank you, Helen. It was a great way to get us started, at least for our panelists. Again, if you're listening in and you have your own thoughts, please feel free to put them in the chat. Let's now go to the actual debate. And Céline, I'll start with you again, because you are leading the whole project from the European Commission side, which is an incredibly important role. My question to you is, from your perspective, leading the Recover team, should the European Commission ask the member states to be more transparent and participatory around the recovery funds? And if so, how should you do it?
Thank you very much for your question. Well, I don't know if we should, but at least we are doing it, and we've been doing it from the very beginning. And Ints, for example, here on the call, with whom we've worked very closely together, I think we'll remember that from the very early days. And why have we done it? We've done it because we've been convinced from the outset that to get it right, we needed to listen and we needed to engage. We couldn't, government and EU institutions, simply devise a recovery in war between us without talking to civil society, to social partners, to youth organization, and also to local and regional authorities. So this is why we have pushed for it. Of course, it was particularly challenging because, as you know, this was all done in a rush. It had to be quick. The recovery had to be quick. It was in the middle of a pandemic, which limited a lot the possible interaction, and it was done at national level by definition, because this was essentially national plans. The legal requirements in the regulation were very limited. It was only an obligation for member states to describe the type of consultations they had carried out. There was no obligation to carry out such consultation. But I have to say, when I look at the 22 plans that we have approved, I think they were quite a high level of engagement already. So they have essentially seen the same interest as we have. The key for me now is in implementation, and as we have really tried to push member states and to together with them to be transparent and engage, we are doing even more in the implementation. You can see on the Commission website already a lot of information published, all the operational arrangements that have been agreed, the scoreboard that is measuring the progress, and really a lot of information revealed on the implementation. And member states on their own websites are really doing so, and we are exchanging best practices, to pointing the one and the other to the good examples that they have. We are also, when we go to the member states, and we go to the member states very regularly for the implementation of the plan, insisting on having engagement directly with civil society, social partners, national parliament, to make sure that this is also an occasion of debate, and that we are really implementing this together. It's important not only for transparency, not only for accountability, but again, to get it right. Thank you.
Thank you, Céline. Follow-up question. I mean, I saw that you've worked in antitrust for a long time, right? Are there lessons learned from that field that you are bringing now to the recovery?
It's funny that you ask, actually, because I usually refer to this engagement with civil society as a market test. I think those of you who have done competition, being antitrust or mergers, know that when you conclude a negotiation with a company, you just want to make sure that you have seen the right things, and you publish it for comments, and this is what we call a market test in the competition world. And I always refer with colleagues to this engagement with civil society as a market test, because only the market test can tell you whether you've got it right or not, or what are the points that you should tweak to get the best out of it. So that's one of the actually many lessons that you can borrow from competition enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you, Céline. Marcella, I'm coming to you now with a question for you, which is Italy, as I mentioned in my introduction, receiving the largest amount of funds via the Recovery and Resilience Facility, poses enormous opportunities, but also risks, right? And how is Italy approaching those risks specifically, and to ensure that it's open and effective recovery? There's a big risk and opportunity in there. Can you say a bit about that?
Okay, thank you, Paul. First of all, let me say that Italy is currently the co-chair of the steering committee of the OGP, and we just adopted our 5th national action plan to advance in the implementation of the open government principles and bring the strategy of recovery and resilience closer to the practices of open government. Among the 5 pillars of a national plan, we included a specific area to promote transparency and ensuring the integrity of public action, especially in emergencies such as pandemics, issues of social inequality, or access to basic public services. That's why it is necessary to ensure the transparent use of the resources which are granted under the EU Recovery and Resilience Facility. And as first beneficiary of the RRF grants and loans, we feel a special responsibility to do that. We aim to reduce structurally the current information asymmetries on the quality and integrity of public expenditure, and our 5th national plan envisages to strengthen corruption prevention strategies, as well as to optimize open data to be shared among administrations, citizens, and businesses as an essential element for public action. As spending begins across the EU member states, we need to make sure that transparency, accountability, and civic participation are embedded into recovery spending, and we are applying open government principles across several initiatives related to the recovery plan Italia Domani. First of all, we are committed to simplifying 600 procedures, and we just launched an open consultation to have proposals from citizenship. It will be closed by the end of May. On another hand, we, as far as public spending related to the national plan is regarded, we are adopting transparent procedures. contracting information, loan and grant agreements are being published on a single government gateway, which is called italiadomani.gov.it. Open data portals are key to making spending data accessible and usable, also for researching public expenditure. We will adopt soon the register of beneficial ownership to publish detailed information on final recipients, including any beneficial owner of fund recipients. Finally, we created specific venues for public consultation and participation. The active engagement of citizens and civil society in the design, implementation, and monitoring of recovery spending is critical for a prosperous and sustainable recovery. We are convinced that stronger civil society engagement leads to better outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcella. If I can have a follow-up question as well. I think one of the examples OGP uses a lot, I personally use a lot, is Open Coesione as an example of Italy really early on opening up all the information on sort of EU-funded projects and spending, from small things like student loans almost to highway bridges, right? And what is interesting about that project is how you every round in a way have made it stronger by adopting additional standards, by opening it up to journalists and students. Do you have plans to share more of that thinking and that experience with your European counterparts? Or is there a way for other European countries to learn from what Italy has already done way before the recovery funds around opening up big spending?
Yes, of course. I'm personally part of a high-level expert group, which has been set up by the DG reform on public administration and government. And it is an expert group which will share all best practices which have been set up in the member states. So I think that is the best way to communicate our best practices in this field, starting from open government, as well as other means that we are using to implement transparency, like, for example, Italia Domani, our website portal, where the whole information regarding the national plan will be stored. So I think it is, yes, a good idea, and we will implement it.
Thank you, Marcella.
Thank you.
I'm coming to you now on Latvia. Latvia actually has included a commitment in its latest OGP action plan to strengthen cooperation with civil society in the implementation and monitoring of your recovery and resilience plan. And that's important because if you look at OGP data from the first 10 years, if there's one thing we can say with confidence after 10 years is that working with civil society gets you more ambitious reform commitments, but they also get better implemented if you continue working with civil society during implementation. Can you talk a bit more about what the cooperation with civil society in the case of Latvia will look like, and how you will ensure that with that you get the biggest impact, real impact on Latvian society?
Yeah, thank you. Quite a wide question, but I can say, of course, we have good experience to cooperate with civil society, but at the same time, for the future stage of implementation of this recovery plan, we see that now our social partners and society are very interested and very deeply involved in even in technical details of regulation. Each activity now, what we are discussing now in our ministries, line ministries are preparing regulation regarding every activity of this plan, and many of NGOs and civil society partners are involved in this process. And of course, at the same time, we have almost every week some webinars, some meetings with roof organization of our NGOs. There business society and some social society are interested in such processes, and we are ready. We're always meeting them and to talk together with them. And for my opinion, the biggest role is maybe not so much about spending of the money, but how we can use our good relation with our NGOs and civil society when we come to reforms, because it's always painful, it's not easy, and always somebody wins, some of part of society maybe lose something, and we would see our social partners and so civil society and partners from broader society just to be partners to implement and make possible those reforms what we have planned in our plan RRP, and this is very important how we can deal with that. Of course, the work just started, and we see everything goes quite well, but for the next years we have very challenging time, especially now, you know, the situation around this part of Europe where we are, and nobody knows how exactly it will come, but that will go. But now we see that our society is very active, and we really hope that we will cooperate, especially during this very painful reforms. For example, some examples of reforms in higher education. We have a lot of challenges there because the quality is not sufficient. Then we should come to renewable energy and how we can deal with local municipalities where the society is against some activities like windmills or something like that, what we need exactly what should be implemented. And green organizations are sometimes very against that. We are going to put out the same windmills in the sea, and that's we should deal with them from different point of views, and that it would be not easy, and we really hope that it wouldn't be just political discussion, but it would be as well some broader discussion in society. And then we see that as we should manage all such different points of view. But yeah, I think it's would be very good to continue this good cooperation. And of course, during the plan, preparing of this plan, we had quite tough discussions with our partners, but that's normal, that's good. And now we see that everything goes more smooth way, those discussions. And then I think we will be, in the future, we will overcome all the problems that we have still. Thank you.
Thank you, Ints. Follow-up question for you. I mean, aside from being working at the national level of politics, you also work at the local level of politics, right? You're at the city level. How is that different? How are your conversations around recovery and difficult reforms different at the local level where you're so close to citizens compared to the conversations you have with colleagues at the national level?
Yes, you're right. I am a member of local city municipality as well, and where I'm living. And of course, there are different kind of problems. Of course, in the smaller cities or smaller communities, there are very particular, very precise problems about that street, that place, what we should do, what we deal with that. And in such case, I would like to see more active society. We have just few, maybe it's very, very active NGOs here in my city, but at the same time, I think they could be more active, more interested in local processes. What I can say in government level, in national level, there's everything more or less okay, because I see that it's very, very good. But the cooperation in our city, I am opposition member of this local council, and of course I have very close relationship with different NGOs, but I would like to see that we should work more closely with them. That I can say there is still space for improving the situation.
Thank you, Ints. It was really interesting to be at the local level in the opposition and the national level at the.
Yeah, that's democracy. That is very
That's
good.
Democracy, exactly.
That's
Yeah.
I really appreciate that we have such situation. You should, as politician, you should be ready for any role.
I agree, and it keeps you very grounded. I can sense. Helen, come to you for the final question of our first round. You have many hats, but you are also a representative of Open Spending EU Coalition, which is a collaboration, I would say, of civil society experts and advocates across Europe. What do you think are the most significant gaps or problems in the implementation that you already see or that you worry about seeing in the Recovery and Resilience Facility? And what should the Commission on the one hand, but also member states on the other hand, do about it?
Thanks very much, Paul. Yes, the Open Spending EU Coalition is a network of civil society around Europe, which is mapping both the legal frameworks and the transparency that we have in practice. It's definitely true, as Céline has said, that we have certain levels of transparency, and member states are being encouraged to be participatory in the spending of these funds. But as we've actually just heard from Ints, it's still patchy within countries and around Europe. If we had sufficient transparency, we probably wouldn't be having this call today. If we had sufficient transparency, we wouldn't have a network of investigative journalists talking to Access Info Europe about the difficulties they've had obtaining information and getting our help with their information requests. If we had platforms similar to Open Coesione, which is a great platform, but it hasn't been replicated anywhere else. If we had that in other countries, that would be fantastic for those either wishing to follow the spending of the funds or wishing to participate, to be able to evaluate, for example, if the 37% green target is actually being met, which is a real concern of many environmental organizations who can't get a clear picture of that, either at the national level or Europe-wide. If we had cap fund type requirements to publish the beneficiaries and the nature of the funds that they'd received, then we wouldn't be calling for opening up the data on the beneficiaries. If all member states were using the Arachne tool, and if that were open, then we wouldn't have both civil society calling for that to be used, and even the head of OLAF saying that it's an insufficient tool for carrying out proper anti-corruption and anti-fraud work. Those are a handful of examples. What we've done at the Open Spending EU Coalition is divide our recommendations into what can be done with the existing legal frameworks and what could be done, what would perhaps require legislation. Right now, we can focus on what can be done with political will. And we've seen in the response in the last 3 weeks to the crisis in Ukraine, just how much can be done with political will. I would say that this is, I mean, there's a war and that's important, but this is really important. As we discussed in the first round, this is about the future of Europe and European democracy and the future of the planet. So there are things that can be done. For example, we heard about Italy just now committing to opening up beneficial ownership registers. They could be opened up for free, and company registers. The European Commission is dragging its heels on setting up the implementing act to open up company registers under the Open Data Directive. Now is the time to act. I'm sitting in Spain where members of the public and journalists can't access the beneficial ownership register. So there are things that are legally required that we could be doing. And then there are things that we could do to go beyond those, such as voluntarily setting up websites and opening up this. And I think that there's interesting work being done in Italy on that. Last sort of thought about actually how we take this forward. We've got an hour, we've already used 30 minutes. There's so much to discuss. There are so many detailed technical bits of transparency that we need to get right. There's a framework where we need the transparency mechanisms, the open company registers, the beneficial ownership registers. My proposal from Access Info, and I'm sure from my colleagues on the Open Spending EU Coalition, and I would hope that OGP would also support this, would be that we actually set up some kind of task force, a transparency task force, going forward from this meeting, where we can have the civil society, the investigative journalists, the civil society, not only the transparency people, but the people working on climate change, for example, or the pandemic recovery issues, healthcare, working with members of the coalition, of the commission and national representatives in a kind of working group where we actually look at the practical questions and see how we can solve them. Because we've had a number of these high-level discussions and we map out what needs to be done. But the challenge is, how do we follow up from that? So I propose that we actually set up some kind of working group where we can take these discussions forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Concrete idea, we'll come back to it. One follow-up question quickly for you is, you've been in this space for a long time, right? You've seen the access to information. I didn't mean it like that. You've seen the access to information sort of field develop, and you know, from about a decade ago or so, when open data started coming up, what can we learn from these processes on getting this right and not making the same mistakes? What can we learn from the access to information growth and from the open data development?
Two things I would say. One is that we do need legislation to make to really ensure that we don't have good initiatives which are done voluntarily, which are then reversed. And legislation needs to be detailed and precise. And secondly, that we should be learning better and sharing our best practices. That goes to the point I was making about having some kind of working group, things like Open Cohesione. For example, with the EU funds, to take one concrete example, we have as I've already mentioned, with the CAP funds, we have a concrete requirement that member states publish the details of the recipients, the beneficiaries, with a balancing built into that on personal data protection, so that if you get below a certain amount of money, it's not public. Above a certain amount of money, we know who the recipients are. Why are we not doing that across all EU budget lines? So we make advances when there are scandals. That's a huge lesson learned. When there's been a scandal on the use of CAP funds, we put in some strengthened transparency mechanisms. I can promise you, we're only at the beginning of the spending of the recovery funds. There are plenty of scandals coming down the road. Why don't we anticipate what kind of problems we're going to have? We know from past experience what mechanisms we need to put in place, and do that now before the scandals happen. Thanks,
Helen. So that's a great line to end our first round on. Many insights across the four panelists, and we have Francesco Leone stepping in for Marcella, Panucci for the second half of the debate. Marcella might come back. So we'll bring up the questions from Slido and from the chat in a bit, but there's one in there that I want to sort of ask first for all of you to see who wants to come in on it, which is this element of voluntary, right? So there is the voluntary side of, and I know how the EU works, so I think Céline, you probably will come back and say, well, there's only so much we can oblige them to do. But it is an interesting point, right, where some countries take that voluntary transparency participation very far. Sweden, I think, what Italy does with Open Cohesione, others not so far. Is that something we should move on, or should we accept that scandals will come down the line, to use Helen's quote? I mean, I hope there will not be scandals, actually, but who knows? So is that a key problem, the fact that it is voluntary in a way in how countries interpret what participation looks like, what disclosure of beneficial ownership looks like, what participation looks like? It's an open question to all of you, but perhaps Céline, I'll start with you, and then we'll see who else comes in.
Thank you very much. Well, I think there are two things to distinguish here. There's one is transparency, the other one is participation, and of course they are linked, because you can only participate well if you know what you're talking about. But I think it is still two different issues. On the transparency, I think the transparency is already very good. Even the Ombudsman thought that the transparency that was provided by the Commission and the member states together on the beginning of the implementation of the recovery fund was a good one. And we really made an effort and it is a daily effort to disclose on our own motion as much as we can on all aspects of the recovery. And I think that is a good thing, and that should also be recognized, and allows a very good understanding by the civil society of what's going on. Then you have the more granular publication of data by the member states on final recipient, because for us the beneficiaries are the member states, and that is indeed not legally binding on them, so they can choose to do it or not to do it. I wouldn't go as far as Helen by saying if they don't do it, then it's scandals. I think we also have a job to do, and we are really for each and every payment request checking in a lot of details the evidence that is provided by the member states to precisely ensure that we have a proper spending by the member states. Then on the participation, what we can do is provide a framework and have between the member states some sort of peer pressure, and I think that is working pretty well. If you look at the operational arrangements, they do set out the way this implementation will take place. They do provide a frame and a platform for exchanges, and this is working actually in practice when we are there, but also in practice when we are not there. So between, as Ints was referring to, the member state and civil society directly. So I think you have quite a lot of things already happening, and I would then try to nuance a little bit more this perception that it's all dark and scandals. Thank you.
Helen is an advocate. That's how she speaks. But it is an interesting proposition. I have a follow-up question on that. But first, on this one, Ints, perhaps, if you have thoughts about if we should be more firm on what we ask different member states in terms of transparency, should it be more on the obligation side, or is it okay how it is from your perspective?
Yes, I think we will follow all the proposals, or our country. We will introduce all this transparency system, and we will try to involve as much as possible our civil society as well. But for the whole regulation, for my opinion, it wouldn't be okay that it will be more firm regulation about that, and we should ask for every member state that just to follow more strict rules in such for the transparency and other requirements to involving civil society. For my opinion, it's okay, and as member of parliament, I always follow the idea that every euro cent should be possible to follow. It is public money. It should be seen even publicly when what the salaries are personally for every civil servant or people who receive something from public funds. That was big, so can I say, big discussion about in our country, and even our parliament voted for that it should be like that. Our constitutional court unfortunately canceled this rule, and that was for my opinion, that was my idea, and that was for me a big disappointment. But for my, as politician, I agree that it should be more firm written in a regulation. Thank you.
Thanks, Ints. I'm staying with you for a second because there's a question came in on the Slido that I think you're well placed to answer, and then others can answer it as well, which is the question if how either the Commission or member states can support civil society as co-implementers and monitors of the facility. And I know that Latvia has included some of its activities, some of the projects under the recovery plan are actually about civil society playing a watchdog role. How does that look like in practice? And the concrete question actually is, when will it be launched, this support?
Yeah, you're right. We have kind of as well some part of our plan includes support to capacity of civil society organizations. But honestly saying, I'm not sure that all this regulation is already done, and our state chancellor, who is responsible for our country, in our country, for that relations with NGOs, they are working on this regulation, as I know, and it's not still ready. But of course, at least we have some ideas, some finances for that, and how we can support capacity, especially for those organizations. And we will see how when it will be ready. And unfortunately I can't exactly answer all the details how this project will be organized. But I think there are very close cooperation with different kind of organizations there, and then we have this roof organization as well, civil society, and I think they will find the best way how we can organize that way. I hope that other countries as well have done some such kind of activities would be in the case of civil society, but I don't know exactly how the other countries are doing. Thank you.
Thanks. Helen, coming to you. There's this role of civil society, sometimes seen as actors in their own right, sometimes seen as intermediary for citizens. But what do you think around the recovery is the most important role that civil society can play? Is it more advocating for what the money is spent on? Is it helping organize participation of society at large? Is it bringing technical expertise? Is it monitoring? What do you think is the best contribution civil society can bring?
Thanks, Paul. Well, let's recall, first of all, that civil society has a number of different players in it. So there may be organizations, there are national platforms that have been formed to really look at the details of what the money is being spent on. So that's a role for civil society there. Other parts of civil society include we're seeing in the chat, Kevin from Transparency International France, talking about the frustrations they have with finding the ultimate beneficiaries of this funding, or Ada Homolova, who's an investigative journalist, also civil society, if you like, who works on open data and is also trying to follow this and having difficulties getting the information. So we have different civil society actors. You'd asked earlier a question, Paul, about how do we structure this participation? I do think we have very good models with the forums that we create around the national open government action plans. And I've seen the real difference that setting up those forums make in terms of ensuring that there's a proper discussion, dialogue between different members of civil society and others, academics, businesses, also a very important player here in talking to government about what they need. So again, I'm not saying, Céline, that it's all black. I didn't say that. I specifically said we've made a lot of progress with transparency, but we're not there yet. We don't have enough. And we're getting testimonies to that in the chat for this call. If we get ourselves into this kind of it's good enough, it's not good enough kind of debate, we don't make progress. We recognize all the work that the Commission's been doing, but how can we help you? There's another role. This is my idea of having some kind of participatory task force to work on this. How do we help you by generating at the national level the political will and the acceptance of what you might be asking member states to do, perhaps voluntarily? So if you're asking member states to put information into the Arachne tool, if we had a campaign at the national level encouraging governments to really act on that and participate, we could have more impact. We have to be able to have a fact-based conversation about what we've achieved and what we haven't, and then analyze and come up with actual actions as to how to address where we still don't have enough transparency or enough participation.
Thanks, Helen. I was just going to go to Francisco, but he's busy for a second. So let me make it a question for all of you, which is we talk a lot about the risks, right? The risk of corruption, the risk of misuse, which obviously is there. But how do you weigh that? How do you see that? And perhaps I'll start with you, Céline, against the other risks, right? Which might be a bit like more in the sense of, how can we ensure we get the most out of our money spent, right? So not the corruption side, but actually the impact side of the money, right? This is a as we often heard, a once in a generation investment in our democracy and societies, right? How can we make sure we get the most out of it? Are we doing everything to ensure that? And one example, for example, when I was preparing for this, on the data point, people were saying, like, look, if this money is supposed to help us with the climate change challenge, we at least should know in detail what the money is spent on, the data on what it goes to, because otherwise you can't assess actually if it helps or in what way it helps with countering climate change. So are there ways of doing more, perhaps not to curb the corruption, but to maximize the impact, or at least know what the impact is?
Thanks a lot. Well, again, I think two things. What is the money? What is the substance of the plans, and what will the money spent on? And then the corruption and fight against corruption, and how do we make sure that what is supposed to be done is being done, and that the money is not used for a different purpose. I think on what the money will be spent on. Here, I do think that we do have a lot of transparency and a lot of information. As if you look at the plans themselves, if you look at the detail of the measure, and then if you follow that through at national level on the implementation, which you can do because the member states are publishing all that information, then you can very precisely see what the support schemes that are supposed to be implemented are implemented. You can see what reforms are tabled to deliver on the plan, and that not only you can see at the level of the plan, but you can also see as the implementation progress, because we are publishing the assessment that we are making, and that you can already see that for the first payment request we have received. So you really have measure by measure with all the links to the national regulatory steps taken of the implementation. So there I would really think that if you're interested, if someone is interested to really see how what is happening and what is being done with the money, I think it is there. Of course, it is a performance-based instrument. So what you can see is that they do deliver on what they have committed to do. You don't follow the money cost by cost because it's not structural funds. And this is not the logic of the instrument. The logic of the instrument is really they have committed to achieve something. They have provided concrete objectives and targets for doing that. Are they delivering on it? Then turning to the corruption, I think there is some information, not more information, not the information on final recipient. It's not that it was overlooked. I think it was discussed. It was very much discussed in particular in the parliament, and there was simply no majority, no agreement for having that inserted in the regulation, and that's unfortunately where it stops. Maybe next time the decision will be different, but for the moment this is what we have. At the same time, you were mentioning Arachne several times. The immense majority, almost the totality of the member states, will use Arachne for the implementation of the plan. So it's not mandatory, true, but I think except of Germany and Sweden, for the moment, as far as I remember, most of the member states, or almost the member states, will use that. So it is actually better than it looks in that respect. But there, how you can help us? You can really help us by putting the pressure on the transparency at national level, because it's not something that's going to come from the EU levels, and we have nothing against. We would be all in favor of this publication of this data. We just can't do it. So you have to do it really in those countries where this is not happening, and of course picking up wherever you have serious and substantiated indication that something is going wrong. Then of course reporting that to the member states, first and foremost, because the audit bodies of the member states are the really frontliners on the protection of the EU financial interest, and obviously to us as well. Because I agree with the comment that we had in the chat. The Commission is not the only one and cannot be the only one in charge, especially in a system like this one, which is very much giving responsibility to the member states who are really a part, and the essential part of the protection of the financial interest. So you have to work with the member states there to ensure that we are getting also a proper spending of the money. Thanks.
Thanks, Céline. Very clear. And I forgot who of you said earlier on, sort of, there's the point of sort of crisis creates political will moments, right? I think that's a very important point. And to your point, Helen, about beneficial ownership and opening on the final beneficiary, I think we now around the crisis in Ukraine, which is a very different crisis, of course, than we're discussing today, you see that importance of beneficial ownership and being able to follow the money, right? So perhaps this will indeed come back next time when we have such a big moment in European solidarity. A question for you, Francesco, if I may, coming from Italian civil society. Let me pull it up, which is how can we combine the need to implement the recovery plans quickly with the urgency at the same time to design participatory mechanisms to engage civil society and citizens? Can you share some of the thinking of Italy around that?
Yeah, thank you so much, Paul. Well, as said by our head of cabinet, Vincenza Panucci, Italy feels this deep responsibility of being the first beneficiary of RRF grants and loans. So the quick question is to go ahead with the milestones and targets as agreed with the European Commission. We are quite happy about also the preliminary assessment, quite positive. And at the same time, develop all these participatory meeting mechanisms, starting maybe from the experience by Open Coesione, which is a success story, as you mentioned. This year, we will mark the 10-year anniversary of Open Coesione, which was launched in 2012 in the old world of the MFF 27-2013. And now what it is striking about Open Coesione, well, it is an open monitoring process, fully horizontal, monitoring something like 103.8 billion of cohesion expenditure, and with a particular focus on transport and infrastructure. So one of the pillars of our RRF program. So maybe we should start using Open Coesione as a success story also for the RRF. We are also including some participatory mechanisms. We are quite happy to be also co-chair of Open Government Partnership, and you will notice that in our 5th National Action Plan that we just adopted, there are several references about civil society engagement, and how to engage better civil society and the society at large, because usually society is civil by definition. So you will see this, and you will see a lot also about participatory mechanisms in the mission 5 of our NRRP Italia Domani as regards cohesion and inclusion. Especially in the South, we have an issue about this, but not just in the South. And our aim is indeed to use the RRF resources to build a better and open participatory mechanism, especially as regards infrastructure planning. Thank you.
Thanks, Francesca. So we're getting to the close, and I want to ask one final question to all of you, which is, aside from experts and civil servants and politicians, you're also all citizens. That I'm sure, Céline, we've all used the transparency out there to see what our own countries have committed to under the recovery fund. What is one of the projects you have seen, whether in your work job or by following the news of your own country, that you're most excited about? What is one of the projects that will be funded by this once in a generation investment in our societies that excites you? Let me start with you this time, Helen.
Thanks, Paul. I'm not going to answer your question, I'm afraid, in my closing words. Even though I am now a Spanish citizen, there's lots of good things happening here too. This call is what's exciting me. I'm looking at the participants on this call. It's the members of the Open Spending EU Coalition, investigative journalists, people from the UNCAC anti-corruption network, the people who would be ready to engage in that process of making this more transparent and participatory. What I don't see is enough people from governments, so I'm only half excited. But we have the Open Government Partnership, which is a great platform for bringing civil society and government together. So the whole initiative from OGP to have us talking about the RRF and how to make it more participatory, and for that, more transparent and accountable. Let's that's the project that most excites me, and let's keep the conversation going as per my earlier proposal. Thank you.
Thanks, Helen. I do hope the other speakers will answer my question. Let's go to you, Ints. What are you most excited about in the Latvian plans?
It's very difficult because we have so many activities and so many measures there. But for me, I can say that personally, as I mentioned before, I think the reform of higher education, improve the quality of higher education, for me is the most significant part of for me personally, and I think for the most promising project for the future of my country. And that's I see it was not necessary for many years, and then finally it's put in the plan and it's going on very actively. And I hope it really would to make big impact on economical, social, and other aspects of our life in our country. That's personally for me is very important. Thank you.
Thanks, Ints. Céline?
Well, it's actually very, very difficult for me to answer that because I never, throughout this process, I don't have a plan. I have 27 of them. And I could mention for each and every one of them something I like very much and something that I thought was very transformative and it was good to do it. If I just take a few examples in the Spanish labor market reform that has allowed finally the terrible segmentation of the labor market in Spain to be moving in the right direction and at a record speed, I think is something I'm extremely happy about. The reform of the civil justice in Italy is something that could really be a game changer for the business environment in Italy. But it's only one of the sort of 50 game changers that you have in this plan. The reform of the education in Slovakia, where you have an amazing outflow of students without any possible comparison in other member states, is also something that I'm really happy about. Or the long-term care in Slovenia. And then I would really bring you, and I could bring you for each and every one of them, something that I really think we can collectively be proud of, and where member states have used this recovery instrument, this performance-based instrument, as an occasion to drive through a very difficult reform agenda. Because as Ints was saying, it is a difficult agenda. Reforms are always difficult. If they're not difficult, then they're not really reformed very, very, very often. So this is really what I'm the happiest about, and it's not one, it's at least 27. Thank you.
But those are great examples. Thanks for sharing. Francesco, last to you.
Thank you, Paul. Well, I'm a public official, so I'm a little bit biased, but maybe just to flag out, apart from the reform of the Italian justice, which is undergoing, and right now, the call for action we just started on our participatory platform Partecipia.gov.it on simplification and streamlining of all administrative procedures. Maybe a word on public procurement, because this is maybe the area, the policy area where you need to connect the speed again and transparency and openness. All Italian citizens and businesses and civil societies can, until May 18th, participate in this public consultation, which is linked to two very important milestones, in my opinion. One for 2024, where we should simplify, as Marcella said before, and 200 administrative procedures, and 600 until 2026. So you can have your voice and you can be effective. If I switch to investment very briefly, maybe just to highlight maybe one example, I won't mention a single project, but maybe a policy area. What we are trying to achieve with culture. Culture can be a powerful connection for civil society participation. We wanted to include a strong pillar on culture in our recovery plan. And we did so in a way also to link this with the urban regeneration project. So maybe culture, especially in these dire times for Europe, can be again a powerful connector for a more open and European civil society. Thank you.
Thank you a lot. And I really wanted to end on this optimistic note, right? Because I think, as we've said, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to invest massively in our economies, our societies, our democracies. Yes, there are big risks if we get this wrong. There's a risk of misuse, there's a risk of corruption, there's the risk of feeding anxieties and mistrust. But I think we really have to be optimistic about the opportunity this offers. There's a lot of experience out there. We've heard today about how open government approaches can help make this better by making it more transparent and participatory, whether it's around the open cohesion example we heard, if it's the open procurement example where our dear colleagues from Ukraine have been leading for a long time. Unfortunately, hopefully that will come back soon and they can focus again on open procurement and making the society stronger. I think, Céline, you said, yes, reforms are always, almost always difficult, but they're also always, or often, highly anticipated because people know exactly what needs to change, even if they don't have the power to change it. And I think this is also an opportunity to get the reforms right, not just for the people, but with the people. I really want to thank you, Helen. I want to thank Francesco for stepping in for Marcella. Thank you in regards to Marcella. Thank you, Céline, for joining us as well. And Ints, thank you for sharing the Latvian perspectives. Thank you all. So to all participants, this was a short but energizing conversation. I really appreciated your participation in it, and I wish you a good day.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thanks, Paul. Have a good day, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Let's keep in touch.